Welcome back, Cathodic friends. Almost 5 years ago, I put this video online. In its first month, it got a good 50 views. Then, over time, to be honest, it gave me some great satisfaction. But the real question, the one we always ask ourselves in reloads is, can we do better?
Tutti un maggiordomo, in originale Family Affair, è un telefilm americano prodotto dalla CBS e durato 5 stagioni.
I'd say we have to do better. And we'll do it after the theme song. Let's start with the elephant in the room. This, as unfortunately sometimes happens, especially when young actors are involved, is a series that has left behind dregs and even deep wounds on those who worked on it. American showbiz is a ferocious beast that takes no prisoners. But this, if you've been following me even for a short time, you already know. However, let's not put the cart before the horse. We need to start from the beginning. And to do that, I need to tell you about the producer of the series, Don Fedderson. Don Fedderson, in the early 60s, was considered one of the most successful producers of that period. The sitcom My Three Sons was an example of a model family series. Well written, never banal, not too expensive, and above all, long-running. In addition to this, Don Fedderson managed to convince rather important big-screen actors to commit to a TV series for years. In My Three Sons, and if you're wondering, yes, it aired here too, Fedderson had hired none other than Fred MacMurray. The name may not mean much to you, but if, like me, you absolutely love old movies from the 30s or 40s, well, you can't fail to recognize that face. MacMurray appeared in dozens of films. When he signed on to work on My Three Sons, he was still a Hollywood star. Very highly rated, and as you well know, in the 60s, those who were successful in cinema rarely agreed to work in TV, which was considered a step back in an actor's career. How did Fedderson manage to convince such high-level actors? I'll explain that shortly. For now, let's go back to the early 60s. With My Three Sons going strong, without showing the slightest sign of slowing down, Fedderson decided to produce a second family sitcom. This time, while maintaining a rather reassuring narrative, we are still in the 60s, he dared a little more by eliminating the natural parent figures to explore the management of a group of children by two men who, up to that point, had never had to interact with children or teenagers. This, let's call it a format, was revolutionary for that period, and over time, it would set a precedent, generating a whole series of imitators in the following 20 years. I'll just give you 3 titles that we've already covered on the channel: Webster, Different Strokes, and Silver Spoons. The story, for those who don't know it, is more or less this. There's Bill Davis, a wealthy and single civil engineer who, when he's not living in his Manhattan penthouse, served hand and foot by his personal butler, Mr. French. He's out building bridges and dams and enjoying life. Until his brother and sister-in-law die in a car accident, leaving 3 poor orphaned creatures. Sissy, the oldest, played by Kathy Garver, is 15 years old, and Buffy and Jody, 6-year-old twins. So the 2 men have to learn overnight how to manage and raise 3 children. For the part of Uncle Bill, Don Fedderson once again aimed high and signed Brian Keith, who at the time was also a leading Hollywood star. So how did Fedderson convince these big-name actors? The answer is planning. In a period when TV series were produced day by day with the sole time constraint of delivering everything for the weekly broadcast, Fedderson completely changed the paradigm. First, a good 3 weeks were spent writing all the episodes of a season. Then, scripts in hand, the shooting days were scheduled, and only after most of the filming was completed did the series begin to air. This allowed all the scenes of the most famous actors, Brian Keith and Fred McMurray, to be shot in just 2 30-day blocks, regardless of the episode. This translated into an enormous advantage for the actors, as they then had the rest of the year to devote to cinema, without having to worry about the TV series. Put like that, it seems easy, almost obvious. However, I invite you to think about it. We are in the 60s and there are no computers except at NASA. Everything is shot on film and it's not very easy to view it on the fly. And all you have to logistically plan all this is paper and pencil. Imagine how difficult it must have been for the script supervisor to coordinate everything and avoid all possible continuity errors. Imagine shooting a scene from episode 3, then after the cut, changing the entire set, changing the clothes, and shooting a scene from episode 7. And now imagine that perhaps the following scenes would be shot months later. And clothes, the position of objects, set furniture, had to be exactly the same. All managed with this stuff here. Show notebook and pen. That's why the others didn't do such a thing, because only Fedderson could work such magic, and no one else. It's not that he was a magician, he had simply created a close-knit work group that had been practically the same for years, which by then worked like a well-oiled machine. However, you know that if you're not careful, gears can also crush you. But let's continue with our story. As a counterpart to Brian Key, who was a known improviser and used to read scripts at the last minute, another actor of great experience was chosen, Sebastian Cabot. An actor with a more rigorous, almost monastic attitude who demanded to have the script at least a week in advance and discussed every aspect of his character with the writers. Although they didn't particularly like each other, they worked very well together on set, and thanks also to their two totally different acting approaches made the series much more interesting. For the part of the older sister Cece, Kathy Garver was chosen, but not immediately. Initially, another actress had been hired, but before filming, thanks to a holiday in old Europe, she had put on weight, a good 6 kilos, which the production deemed unacceptable to the point of tearing up her contract and frantically searching for a replacement, given that the rest of the cast was already well and truly formed. Virginia Martindale, the casting director, saved the day by putting the production in touch with a very young, but already a veteran of the small screen, Kathy Garver. And here there's a little anecdote worth telling. Garver, who was 20 at the time, dyed her hair blonde to appear younger, with a dye that was widely used at the time, but also very cheap, streaks and tips. During the audition, it began to fade, giving a greenish tone to poor Kathy Garver's hair. However, the incident didn't damage her audition. For the role of the twins, who initially weren't supposed to be twins but of 2 different ages, 2 other showbiz veterans were chosen. Johnny Whittaker was even suggested to the production by Keith himself, with whom he had already worked on The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, a 1966 film. Just to make you understand that when I use the term veterans, I don't use it lightly. Garver, who at the time of Family Affair was 8 years old, had been acting professionally since the age of 3. Anissa Jones, on the other hand, came from advertising. She too was a veteran, in spite of herself, since her mother, freshly divorced and having moved to California with her daughter, decided to monetize Anissa's cute little face and make her the family's main source of income. I said earlier that initially it wasn't supposed to be a pair of twins. However, when the producers saw them together, they couldn't help but notice the extraordinary resemblance between the two, and so they decided to change the script. The series was an immediate hit with the American public, who from the very first year took it to 15th place among the most watched series. The second season did even better, reaching 5th place, and it remained there for the rest of the following seasons without ever having significant drops. But the success wasn't limited to the United States. It was a success throughout Europe, and was even the first American television series to be broadcast in China. Needless to say, the merchandising, especially concerning the character of Buffy, Anissa Jones, was an even bigger success. Dolls, little dresses, even Mrs. Beasley, Buffy's doll, was marketed with great success. And this, as always, when something is enormously successful, proved to be a very big problem. But not for the series, but for poor Anissa Jones, who was totally crushed by her character. Imagine a poor 8-year-old girl who has to attend a slew of events where everyone calls her by her character's name and not by her name. And Anissa began to hate Buffy. Things got even worse over the course of the following seasons, because Don Fedderson, who had understood the economic potential of Buffy's character very well, imposed that her character not grow up but always remain a 6-year-old girl. If you've been paying attention up to this point, you'll have understood that at the beginning of the series, Anissa Jones was 8 years old, and in the last season, 5 years later, she was 13, and she was still dressed and had to play the part of a 6-year-old, complete with bandages to hide the first hint of breasts. This had a devastating impact on Anissa's psyche, who, offset, categorically refused to talk about the series and her character, and woe betide you, if you didn't want a rather violent reaction, to call her Buffy when she wasn't playing the part. As I said before, well-oiled mechanisms can very easily crush those who get caught in them, but this wasn't what put an end to the series, which was doing great. Incredibly, it was CBS itself that in '71 decided to completely change its editorial line and cancel all the feel-good and outdoor life series that had been the central pillar of its programming up to that moment. It was the '70s and the public wanted urban, cynical stuff, and why not, with a pinch of violence. This transition, which was called the rural purge by television critics, meant that family affair was also sacrificed on the altar of the new course. If you want me to dedicate a video to the rural purge, write purge in the comments. There were initial negotiations with ABC, which at first seemed interested in acquiring the rights, but then nothing came of it, partly because ABC had its own knockoff version of the series, namely The Brady Bunch. And so, after the 5th season, with unchanged success, the program was cancelled and CBS moved on to other things. Anissa Jones, but also Johnny Whitaker, paid a very high human price because of the series. As sometimes happens, something good comes out of something bad. And in Hollywood, although not formalized, a rule has been applied ever since, which is still applied today, whereby child characters must grow up during the course of the series. As for the tragic death of the unfortunate Anissa Jones at only 18 years of age, there is already a video on the channel in which I tell how it happened. The video doesn't end here, though, so don't go away because there are still some very juicy trivia about the series. But before that, I thank all those who have been following this channel faithfully for a long time, and also those who have landed here in the last month. There are so many of you. Welcome, and I hope you feel at home. And if you feel at home, then subscribe to the channel, give it a big thumbs up, comment, In short, let Uncle YouTube know that the channel should be recommended. If you feel very much at home, then there's the possibility of subscribing, which gives a number of advantages, including the chance to choose, along with me, the series to talk about in upcoming videos. Last thing, and then we'll get back to family affair. If you like the t-shirts I wear, I've created a shop on Etsy where you can buy them. They cost more or less 20 euros, and I'll cover the shipping costs. Well, finished with the announcements. The trivia. Let's talk about Mrs. Beasley, Buffy's legendary doll. If you happen to rewatch the pilot episode, you'll discover that she doesn't have glasses, a fundamental characteristic of the doll. The glasses were only added from the second episode onwards. The reason? Without glasses, the producers thought she had an unsettling appearance. Don Fedderson had his Fedderson universe. All the series he produced shared the same narrative universe, and it wasn't infrequent for there to be crossovers. Jodie and Buffy, for example, appeared in the series To Rome with Love, and characters from To Rome with Love also appeared in My Three Sons. Johnny Whittaker's memorization method to manage the demanding shooting schedule, which required jumping from one script to another in a short time, as all of Brian Keith's scenes were shot in the first few months. Johnny Whittaker developed a unique memorization method. He would read the lines for the next day on the way home from work, then have dinner and play, and finally, his mother would read him the lines while he slept. The next morning, he would go over the lines again in the car on the way to work. He stated in an interview that, above all, listening to the lines while he slept helped him a lot to memorize everything. During the first season, the actor who played Mr. Giles French, Sebastian Cabot, fell seriously ill. To manage his absence for 9 episodes, the character of his brother, Nigel Niles French, played by John Williams, was introduced. The in-story explanation was that Mr. French had been unexpectedly requested to work for the Queen while she was visiting Commonwealth countries. Well, that's all for today. And as always, if you want me to talk about your favorite series, write it in the comments.